Hello, welcome to another episode of Inside the Huddle. Today is Saturday, March 16th. This is episode 4 of Inside the Huddle. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We've got a lot to discuss today on the podcast. NFL free agency is in full swing. Started Monday, move still happening into last night with the New York Jets signing Tyron Smith, and I would expect more action over the next couple weeks, really throughout the rest of the offseason, as it's a continuous thing going into the NFL draft, which is rapidly approaching as well. DiMari, we've got a lot to discuss. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, free agency, it's been a lot of things kind of going on, a lot of surprising moves. It looks like a bunch of friends kind of hopped on Madden and just decided to shake up a few things in the league. So I'm kind of excited to get into some different moves some teams made, maybe some moves some teams didn't make. And let's just break down what teams we think could possibly be Super Bowl dark horses this upcoming year with what they've done in free agency so far.
Yeah, it's gonna be an exciting episode. A lot to get into. We'll go kind of division by division here. We'll discuss, like you mentioned, what teams come out of this winners, what teams come out of this losers, who has bolstered their Super Bowl case, who has kind of bolstered their case to maybe not do as well as expected this upcoming season. Of course, still a lot has to happen. There still are many players available. Trades will still go down. The draft is still around the corner. So there still is a lot to have happen. But after the first wave of free agency here this week, let's kind of discuss all of the happenings around the league. So we'll go division by division here. We'll start in the AFC East. Take a look at all the teams here. Just what are your some overall thoughts on the AFC, some of the moves made, the more active teams, less active teams? It seems like, the Bills went out, got Curtis Samuel. Jets have rebuilt this offensive line. Dolphins haven't done a whole lot. Went out and got Kendall Fuller, went out and got Jordan Poyer. And then when you look at the Patriots, haven't done a whole lot either, which you kind of expected. It seemed like they were in on Calvin Ridley, but they brought back Michael Onwenu. It doesn't seem like they are in that spend large, go all in mode because they are in a rebuild and they still need a quarterback. Their biggest move so far has been, I guess, dealing Mac Jones for a 6th-round pick, which is probably more value than you maybe thought they would get back for Mac and Cheese Jones. So what has been your impressions on the AFC East as a whole here?
So looking at, and again, like you said, we still got some moves we made for the draft, pre-draft after the draft. But I think looking at some of the moves that a lot of these teams make, the division is going to be a lot worse next year than it was this year. I mean, I'm thinking maybe the division winner is sitting at 9 or 10 wins come next year, which still isn't too bad. But just compared to what we're used to seeing from Buffalo and seeing from Miami the last few years, where we're talking about 9 to 10 wins already in that late November, early December range. I just don't think that's going to happen this year. I mean, looking at each team who they did make moves, but it seems like each one in the division has lost more than what they've actually gained outside of maybe the Jets. But then again, we haven't really fully seen what the Jets are capable of because of Aaron Rodgers last year. So I'm just thinking it's still the Bills division to win. You still got Stephon Diggs. You bring Curtis Samuel over there, but you really lose a huge piece of your offense with Gabe Davis leaving and going elsewhere. So for Buffalo, I think they need to attack another receiver in the draft. And if they do so, they do keep Stephon Diggs as well, which, during the season and the course of the last 2 years has kind of been a thing. He's growing unhappy in Buffalo. So if he sticks out in Buffalo and they do go get another receiver, I mean, hate to say it, they do still have Josh Allen. So I don't really see them falling off too much. But that division definitely, I think, got worse after free agency played out.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that the Bills have kind of approached it. Obviously, they brought in Curtis Samuel. They brought back Daquan Jones. Gabe Davis, of course, left. Samuel's solid. I would still think they would target another receiver in the draft to get another young guy. They've got Khalil Shakir, who's young. The future around Diggs is still kind of cloudy, so you don't know how much longer he's going to be here. Curtis Samuel can't be your number one. I think you still got to go in that direction of drafting somebody in the first round, developing him. And if Diggs does end up getting dealt one day, that first round pick can eventually mold into your future number one receiver for a very long time alongside Josh Allen. That's, of course, hopeful thinking. Not every prospect draft pick's going to work out like that, but that's the ideal situation for Buffalo. I feel like out of all the teams that have taken the biggest hit, I think it's Miami. You lost Christian
Absolutely.
Wilkins, you lost Robert Hunt. Now, Robert Hunt, I thought, got overpaid. 5 years, $100 million is crazy, but the Panthers are desperate for offensive linemen because if they don't get it right, Bryce Young's career is going to go off the rails. So I understand why they're desperate, and for a player, a desperate team's the best place to be because you get the most money, you max out your value. But you lost two major pieces in the trenches, arguably your best defensive player. You, of course, already moved on from Xavier Howard. You already moved on from Agba earlier on. So I think they've taken the biggest hit. And, I understand they brought in Poyer. Poyer's not quite the same guy he once was, but he's played in the division, familiar with Buffalo, still solid. I just think personally they've taken the biggest hit. I also am not a big Tua guy, so I just don't totally trust if Rodgers is healthy and playing well, and you have Josh Allen, I think Tua is the third best quarterback in this division. So I think would you tend to agree with that? Maybe
Yeah,
that's crazy, but I think it's not crazy to say, in my opinion.
No, I think I agree. And, that's kind of the thing with a lot of people are questioning what Miami did because, like, you're releasing everyone to clear this cap space
Yeah.
just to extend to which you're not too sure
Yeah.
on. Some fans, I've talked to some Dolphins fans who don't care for Tua, and they're still to this day like, we should have took Justin Herbert, but you got some people that has bought into Tua and they believe and they trust in him. But I do think he's the third best quarterback in the division as well. I mean, he's not too far from the others, but then again, he is because he hasn't really proved much. It kind of gets down to that time to win some big games, and they don't get it done. Obviously, it's not all on him, but so far in the Tua era, Miami can't seem to get over the hump. And December time, we're talking about a team that has the division locked up. They find a way to choke the division away to Buffalo, twice in the last 2 years. So until Tua kind of proves that he can take that step over, go win a division, and get a win in the playoffs, he's definitely in that third range of quarterback play in the division.
Yeah, the daily season or the yearly season collapses continue to happen, and you just wonder if they're really ever. It goes right back to the quarterback if he's ever going to be on that same level of a Joe Burrow, of a Josh Allen. Mahomes is on a level of his own, but it's that second tier level. I still think Tua is probably really in that third tier. So it's going to be interesting, but I think the Dolphins have certainly lost more than they've gained. The Patriots haven't done a whole lot, like you said. Not too surprising. They're in a rebuild. They're not going to go out there and throw the bank at somebody. Seemed like they were in on Calvin Ridley. He goes to Tennessee, which we'll get to here in a little bit. I've got some thoughts on that. I'm not as high on that as many might be, so we'll get to that a little later on. But to me, and maybe I'm biased, and I'm still maybe fired up from Tyron Smith, but I've loved what the Jets have done so far. Joe Douglas in three days, right? Monday he did it. Wednesday he brought in Morgan Moses. Friday, like in 5 days in a week, in less than a week, Joe Douglas has rebuilt his offensive line. You went into this offseason, you had two offensive linemen. Monday he grabs John Simpson. Wednesday he grabs Morgan Moses, and then last night he goes out and get Tyron Smith, which was the big move we were all waiting for him to make. And I like the way that Douglas has done it. He's been creative. I had a good feeling once they traded for Morgan Moses to slot in as the right tackle. I had a good feeling that trade, good value pickup. You swap fourth round picks and you give up a sixth, 218th overall. So you're not really giving up a whole lot. You're basically just giving up a sixth round pick for a right tackle that you desperately needed. Once they made that move, I knew in the back of my mind, I was like, this has got to set up because of the creativity by Douglas to trade for. You don't see too many times where they trading for offensive linemen. I had a feeling that they were going out and setting up a big move, whether that was a receiver, whether that was an offensive lineman. Turns out it's an offensive lineman, and Tyron Smith's a monster. I mean, you as a Cowboys fan, you watched him for a while. What can Jets fans expect in Tyron Smith? The guy's been in the league forever, 13 seasons, all in Dallas. I understand the injury history, which is a concern. He hasn't played a full season since 2015, which is almost a decade here. But the guy has allowed just 5 sacks since 2018. He was fifth among offensive tackles in pressure rate last season. He's a future Hall of Famer. And I think this is also huge too. While he's missed time, he's never missed a playoff game. So he's there in the big moments. If he plays 13, 14 games and the Jets get to the playoffs and he's out there for the playoffs, that's all that matters in my eyes. So he's a monster. He's a future Hall of Famer protecting a future Hall of Fame quarterback. In my opinion, this is the best left tackle the Jets will have since DeBrickashaw Ferguson, who was phenomenal during his career. So what can Jets fans expect from Tyron Smith?
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. I mean, the pros of it is when he plays, he's very good. Future Hall of Famer, he's definitely going to be one of those. And
Yep.
he's guaranteed to protect your quarterbacks. And I mean, to go from protecting Tony Romo and Dak Prescott, to two of some of the bigger names in football, just because they do wear star on their helmet, not to protecting Aaron Rodgers. I mean, you got a guy that know what it takes to keep the quarterback upright and you're going to see it on Sunday when he plays. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has almost nothing to worry about on that left side of him. So I think that's a great move for the Jets. But obviously, the cons is injuries. But looking at him, he is up in age. He's up there in age, and the injuries start to kind of add on. But I think you just said it perfectly. Like, we're not missing 8, 9, 10 games here. If the Jets can get 13, 14 games out of him in the regular season, playoff times, he's healthy. He does, elevate his game to another level come playoff time, and he has that experience. I think that is the main thing
Yeah.
for a Jets team that, even though the players have been to the playoffs, you got a lot of vets. It's just going to be a different thing in the playoffs with the Jet uniform on compared to Rodgers and Green Bay. Different atmosphere, different environment. Everything's gonna be different. So just for him to have that experience of being in the playoffs, and I mean, again, you say world's biggest stage, not the Super Bowl, but Jerry's World, AT&T Stadium. That's like second to playing in the Super Bowl, I guess, every Sunday. That's gonna be a big thing to protect Rodgers, and Smith has been in the league for quite a while. He know what it takes to be one of the best left tackles. That's why he's still doing it. So I think it's a great pickup for the Jets.
Yeah, you make a point. He's been in the spotlight his entire career. He's spent 13 years in Dallas, um, which is a huge organization, one of the biggest in the most richest in the league. The star, Jerry Jones, all that stuff. They're talked about all the time, 24/7, 365. They are making headlines. And now you go to New York in a win now all in year, and you're protecting Aaron Rodgers. To begin with, it's a big market, big city, but you add Rodgers into the mix, and the media is even crazier. And now you're protecting him again. So he's, like you said, you hit it on the head there with he's been in the spotlight. He knows the pressure. He lives up in big pressure moments. So I really like what the Jets did. And now they are in a situation where they have options. They have options through the draft because they could still take an offensive tackle because this is a 1-year deal. So you could take an offensive tackle, have him sit and have depth there. So if Tyron Smith does go down, you have somebody you trust. But now you can go a Dunze, Malik Neighbors. Maybe you get even crazier and you trade up for a Marvin Harrison, or if Harrison falls, Brock Bowers is there. So the Jets have options, and that's what gets me most excited is that they were able to fix this through free agency and trade. Now they have options the rest of the way, and that's where things can get exciting. They also brought in Tyrod Taylor, which is, I mean, the difference from Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Siemian to Tyrod Taylor is just going to be off the charts. It's going to be watching a competent backup quarterback at practice is going to be something that we have not seen in a while. So they also brought in Tyrod 2-year deal as well. So that's solid. Hopefully we don't have to see him a whole lot, maybe only in blowouts. But if Rodgers would to go down for a couple weeks, nothing more than that, you trust Tyrod to go out there and be competitive, unlike the guys that we rolled out last season. So far, good move for the Jets. And this was needed because this fan base, we've been kicked around, knocked around, all these reports that have came out. You kind of needed a move like yesterday where they go out and get a big name to calm the fan base, get them to buy in a little bit more, because it's been a very long season, long off season with a lot of reports. So glad that they've been able to make some moves. So you move on now to the AFC North, which a surprise in Baltimore. I did not see this coming. We've predicted a lot right here on the show, but this was something that I don't think either of us saw coming. All signs pointed towards Derrick Henry going to Dallas. And then out of the middle of nowhere, here come the Baltimore Ravens. Derrick Henry will be in the backfield alongside Lamar Jackson. What is your reaction from a Cowboys fan and what he'll bring to the table for Baltimore?
I'm going to save the Dallas talk for when we
Later
get
on.
on
All right.
on the yeah when we get on the NFC East. I'll save it for there. But for Baltimore, I mean, we've seen Baltimore, kind of bounce running backs around. It seems every year they're pulling out somebody new that finds success if they're not injured. I mean, we've seen J.K. Dobbins and we've seen Gus Edwards and Keaton Mitchell now kind of just came out of nowhere. And now you throw Derrick Henry in that mix. And I mean, I'm not too sure who's going to be running back two for him. I believe it might be Keaton Mitchell. I think Dobbins is a free agent, and Gus Edwards went to LA. So to add Derrick Henry in an offense that is arguably already probably the best rushing offense in all of football. You can argue Cleveland, but we're going to go Baltimore in this case just because the aspect of what Lamar Jackson brings. So we're talking about an offense who runs the ball better than anybody, who has an offensive line that's very solid. And now you throw Derrick Henry in the mix. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel bad for, the AFC North, but you're kind of looking at some other teams and looking at some other teams defensively where you're kind of like maybe the AFC North will be okay. But for Baltimore, I think they did get a lot better with the addition of Derrick Henry, but they still have some question marks at the receiver spots, which do need to be addressed before we kind of want to crown them champion again of that AFC North. Because again, Cleveland got better. Some can argue Pittsburgh got better.
Yeah.
So for them, definitely going to attack the receiver spot. But I do like what they did with Derrick Henry, and I hope he goes over and does his thing, kind of get them over that hump. I really like Lamar Jackson, so I want to see him win. And maybe later on here, I might sign a resignation letter from Dallas and come over to the Ravens bandwagon. So yeah, we'll see what Baltimore does this year, but I really like what they've done so far.
Yeah, and there's this like there's some people out there that say, oh, like last year Derrick Henry wasn't like the same player. And maybe it's because Tennessee wasn't good, but I just don't get that. This is a guy that still finished second in the league in yards. And in the previous year, he went off for 1,500 yards. I mean, this is a guy that has had what, four 1,000 yard seasons, one season over 2,000. He's been one of the best running backs in the top and at the top of the game. Like, I feel like there's been some people out there. I've seen online, social media that are like, "Oh, he's not the same player." I just don't understand that. He's still got so much left. He had a 1,161 yards last year. He led the league in carries. He was second in yards. Like, this was still a top 5 running back. So I know it wasn't the 1,500 yard mark that he hit a year ago. Maybe that's why he didn't have 1,500 yards and didn't do all that. But 1,100 yards is a very productive season. He is still just a absolute uh, it's just tough to tackle. Very difficult to tackle still. I mean, he's a monster. So I really like this move for the Ravens. You add more help in the backfield. Feels like the rich in a way get richer. You still have some questions about the receiving core, but the rich get richer when you look at what they could do. Lamar running, Derrick Henry running. It's going to be tough to stop them. And another move that they made too, which I really like, was Justin Matabuke. They bring him back on a 4-year, $98 million deal, $75.5 million guaranteed. So I'm glad that they are good for them, not glad for the Ravens because they're AFC. They're a team that the Jets will probably have to run through, but good move for them. Matabuke, one of their best players up front on the defensive line last year. Well deserved for him to get a payday, who was a big reason why that team was a 1 seed and of course got to the playoffs. So when you look around the rest of the AFC North, it feels like the Browns have just it was that one big trade. They of course brought in Winston, but Jerry Jeudy alongside Amari Cooper, the Browns, that's got potential to be pretty exciting. You also still have David Njoku in that mix. Like, they've got some potential to be exciting. The only concern is, what is Deshaun Watson going to be this year? What have been your reaction to some of the Browns moves?
Yeah, I 100% agree. When I think the Jerry Judy move, and I kind of looked at the roster up and down, my first question was, "What Deshaun Watson are you getting?" Because I mean,
Yep.
this might sound crazy to some, but I see a world where James Winston can go in there and possibly, I don't want to say beat out Deshaun Watson for the starter right away, but have a good enough camp to where it kind of light some fire under Deshaun Watson. Where like, hey, I got maybe 4 to 5 games here, and if I'm not playing good, then I'm going to be sitting on the bench, and I know it's going to look pretty bad for Cleveland considering all the money they spent on him. But just looking at that roster and looking at the defense already, from what they did last year with no Nick Chubb, no Deshaun Watson, to go as far as they did, and now you're getting everybody healthy back, and you're throwing Deshaun Watson back in there. If he can be even maybe 60% of what he was in Houston, I think there's a great chance that team can win 11 to 12 games. But if we get Deshaun Watson, we've seen this past year where he's just throwing the ball kind of wherever, making bad decisions and just mental errors, then I don't think he will do any good. And it's kind of going to be a waste of a year for Cleveland. I hate to say it considering what they do have, but you're just looking at the weapons surrounding the quarterback. And, you forgot Elijah Moore. That's another one in there who really stepped his game up last year when they needed to. So they definitely have a lot of weapons around their quarterback. It's just, what can Deshaun Watson do? That is going to be the biggest question mark for Cleveland.
Yeah, exactly. And they also get Nick Chubb back into the fold too, who missed a good chunk of last year with that brutal knee injury. So they've got all the playmakers they need. The biggest question is quarterback. Now, I guess we can maybe already predict that Jameis Winston might be in the conversation for comeback player of the year here if he goes out there and has
Absolutely.
a season like Joe Flacco did, where he went 4-1 as a starter. But yeah, I mean, the biggest question with Watson, if Watson, like you said, is just somewhere near Houston, he doesn't need to be fully back to Houston Deshaun Watson. But if he's just, let's say, 70% of Houston Deshaun Watson, they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to be a threat. They're going to be tough to take down. But if he is what he was last year, where not even top 15, bottom half of the league quarterback play, where Joe Flacco steps in and looks 10 times, makes you look like Zach Wilson, that's a problem. So, if Deshaun Watson plays well, this team's going to go far. They're going to go as far as he takes them. That's the biggest thing. So it's weird to think for a quarterback getting all that money. If a couple years ago you would have told me, oh, Watson's going to be on the Browns, he's going to have all these weapons, I would have thought, yeah, this is going to be one of the favorites in the AFC. But fast forward a couple years later, had some off the field issues, and last year wasn't playing well prior to the injury. You have some questions. So we'll see, but they've got the playmakers. It's all about the quarterback. Pittsburgh, of course, also brought in Russell Wilson. They traded Kenny Pickett. Just another reminder of how fast life comes at you in the NFL. You thought for sure Kenny Pickett was potentially the guy in Pittsburgh. Instead, they're replacing him with Russell Wilson, who's getting paid, 39 million, 38 million from Denver. It's only like a 1 million. It's crazy the amount of money Denver's giving him. Pickett goes to Philly, which we'll get there in a little bit. But any other reactions from the AFC North? Obviously, we've discussed a little bit in the last episode, Russell Wilson and what he'll bring to Pittsburgh. But Deontay Johnson got traded too, which is a little bit of a blow for them, but they've still got some pieces.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, I think I don't see them making the playoffs next year. I think they did get worse. I know you got Russ, and I don't think he could be worse than what Pickett did and Rudolph and
Yeah.
Trubisky, all those guys. But you get rid of Deontay Johnson, which I guess I get it because there was a lot of turmoil in the locker room, that we've seen this year. But unless Pittsburgh really plans on attacking the draft and going receiver heavy, I just don't see them having much success with Russ. And it's not even because of Russ, but it's because the weapons around him. George Pickens seems like a guy that's not too happy with the target share. So I don't know who's going to want to come in there and kind of be a part of that. So best of luck to Pittsburgh. But I like the moves that they made. I just don't see them getting better with the moves. And same with Cincinnati. Won't get too much into them, but you lost some guys here. You still might lose out on Higgins. They did bring in Zach Moss, and they signed some safeties. Kind of was a big weakness for them last year, but just those two teams, even with Burrow coming back and now Russ over there at Pittsburgh, I don't see them much of a fighting chance for them in the AFC. I don't think they're going to be terrible. Not 5 to 6 wins, but I think it's going to be very hard for the two of them to get into the playoffs. So I think next year we're talking about Baltimore, Cleveland, possibly running the AFC, and everything's going to go through the two of those teams.
Yeah, and to Baltimore here for a second. Yeah, they haven't. The T. Higgins situation is very interesting to see where he goes. Obviously requested the trade, whether or not Baltimore, or I apologize, not Baltimore, Cincinnati, whether or not Cincinnati is going to respect that trade and trade him. It's going to be interesting to where he could potentially fall. They obviously brought Gesicki. They brought Gesicki and his terrible greedy to Cincy, so he'll be there. But I actually think it's a solid move for them because they needed some tight end help. Zach Moss, like you mentioned, there. Geno Stone, in division guy. He'll go there. Solid move. Had a good year last year. So, look, it's a good division. I just think, like you said, with Pittsburgh, I don't know how much can Russ really outplay Lamar or Joe Burrow or somebody. I just don't see that happening. And just when you look at the talent, I mean, Baltimore, of course, added Derrick Henry. Lamar Jackson won the MVP. Cincinnati, even though they're without T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd's gone, they've still got Jamar Chase. They've still got Joe Burrow. Cleveland's got weapons all over the place. Pittsburgh, they should be better, but how much? Like, it's pretty easy to be better than Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. Like, how much better? So it'll be interesting. But look, you can make a case. A lot of people can make a case that all 4 AFC North teams can make the playoffs. So it's going to be a fun division. It always is that tough, physical, grind type football, but we'll see. So you move on now to the AFC South, where you haven't seen a whole lot of action other than the big move of obviously Jacksonville not re-signing Calvin Ridley. He goes to Tennessee. And I'll be honest with you, I don't love Calvin Ridley to the Titans. dare I say, and maybe this is crazy. Of course, Pollard obviously went there as well. Titans made some moves, but I don't know. Am I crazy to say that Calvin Ridley scream to the Texans screams Kenny Galladay to the Giants vibes? Maybe I'm wrong, but it just feels like I don't love it. What are your thoughts on the Ridley move?
I think he is a bit overpaid. I'm not gonna lie. 23 is outrageous. But I mean, unfortunately, I had to watch a lot of Tennessee last year. I had DeAndre Hopkins on my fantasy team, so it forced me to watch them a lot more than I wanted to. But I mean, they had no help whatsoever outside of DeAndre Hopkins. You draft Traylon Burks a few years ago, who I feel like barely sees the field. I don't know if he's injured or he's just not playing. I don't know what the case is. But outside of DeAndre Hopkins, they have no receiver production. So they really just needed somebody that was going to be able to stretch the field, help. I guess Will Levis is going to be the starter next year. So help Will Levis out. Just somebody that will take some pressure off of D Hop from seeing double coverages and those type of things. I don't think it's too bad of a move. I want to have signed for 23 million, but they definitely needed some receiver help, and that's what they did. They, you know, approached the team need. They can still find some help in the draft, but it's not too bad of a move. But considering I can see where you're coming from, kind of looking how he did in Jacksonville last year, where we had a lot of drop balls and we had some times where he just didn't look like himself. But I guess it was kind of a let me show you what you missed out on. He obviously wanted to stay in Jacksonville. They didn't sign him back. Let me go to a Division Four, and I think it's gonna work out for him. Just 23 is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah, I mean, he was solid last year. He was inconsistent at times.
Mhm.
I mean, to go off for 1,000, I guess after a year off isn't terrible, but I do have some questions about like Will Levis. Like, what is Will Levis? And I don't know. I could just see a high price contract to a team that feels like with the moves that they have. Of course, I got D Hop stuff like that, but it feels like with the moves that they have made that they're still all in on, and not all in on winning, but they went out and got Tony Pollard. They went out and got Calvin Ridley, like these two big signings, two solid players. Ridley, the biggest one. They're not really approaching like it's a rebuild mode, even though they fired their coach and have a quarterback that's just in his second year. I don't know. I think more of it probably is I'm just a little concerned about Will Levis. I don't know what he is. And for a guy getting paid a ton, I could see him getting unhappy. It just screams maybe a little bit of it screams Kenny Galladay to the Giants, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see. It's certainly if he does connect there and they start playing well, it's certainly a good asset to have for your young quarterback in Will Levis to have a number one receiver and of course another veteran guy in D Hop. Now you go to the other teams in the division. Obviously Jacksonville, they get paid a ton for Gabe Davis. I think Gabe Davis is solid, but they gave him a lot of money. I don't know if he's worth all that. And then Indy, of course, brought back Michael Pittman. Houston brought in Danielle Hunter, which I thought was solid for them to pair up Will Anderson up front. So what was some of your reactions to the rest of the AFC South here?
Rest in peace to the Jags being first place
Yeah.
in the AFC.
That's
That I feel like that kind of lasted 1 year. I mean, again, they looking at the list here. You get Gabe Davis, you re-sign Dearness Johnson, Devin Duvernay. Defensive side, you get Arik Armstead, Darnell Savage. Jacksonville made some moves. They definitely made
yep.
some moves. They made some great moves. But I still think there's a possibility they might possibly be the worst team in the division. It's possible. It's
Yep.
not too crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I agree 100% with the Will Levis thing. You just don't know. Looking here, they did go get Mason Rudolph, so it might be one of those things to where like, hey, you don't figure it out, we're going to bench you. But for
Yep.
Jacksonville specifically, for the whole entire division, I mean, you're looking up at the Texans. It was already that way last year, but you go get Joe Mixon, Noah Brown is back, Dalton Schultz is back, Daniil Hunter is there now. You get Aziz Al Shair, FAU alumni. What a guy. Desmond King, Jeff Bakuda. I mean, and you're bringing all that in. You still have the draft. You're getting Tank Dale back. You still have Nico Collins. I mean, the Texans. That might be the team. I'm calling now. We're March 16th. that might be the team to dethrone Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs this year. I can really see it happening. My only thing about the Texans, we always see a sophomore slump.
Yep.
So how is CJ Stroud going to look this year after having so much success in his first year, where now it's, you just went to the playoffs, second round of the playoffs. People are going to be talking about, hey, it might be time for you to either get us back or maybe let's go to the AFC Championship. So Stroud has to definitely elevate his game another level, which I think he will be able to do considering everything around him. And again, they do still have the draft, but looking at the AFC South, I mean, it didn't last too long for Jacksonville to be, the team to beat, which we thought they were going to be for a few years now. I think it's the Texans division, and I think they are very exciting to watch this year. Another team I might gotta possibly sign my rights to be a fan of. I mean, I'm liking what the Texans are building over there. I think they got a pretty solid team.
Yeah, the Texans they're obviously the favorite in my eyes. You know what's crazy though is when you look at the AFC or the AFC South, is like you mentioned, Jacksonville was number one. Everybody, especially going into this season, you won the playoff game last year. You're like, this is the year they started out so well. They had a chance at the 1 seed. Like this Jacksonville team's going to go places, and then they of course blow it down the stretch. Bring in Armstead, which they needed. They needed some interior defensive line help. They've made some moves, but is it crazy? I don't know if maybe this is crazy because we haven't seen Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson's got a ton of talent. He's very athletic. Is can run, throw on the run. Like he's a freak athlete. I don't know if it's crazy to say that Trevor Lawrence by the end of this year, you could potentially look at him as the third best quarterback in the division. Because in my eyes, CJ Stroud has already surpassed Trevor Lawrence. Anthony Richardson, we don't know, but Richardson, when he's played the couple games that he played before he get hurt, he plays a very ruthless style of football, like injury prone style of football, which are a little concerned for him. He puts his body on the line a little too much, and you hope that he learns from that. He's young, but if he is what if he uses all of athleticism, stays healthy, Richardson, sky's the limit for him. Is it crazy? Do you think it's crazy to say that at the end of this year, you could be looking at a world where it's CJ Stroud, then it's the Colts and Anthony Richardson, then it's Jacksonville, kind of the way the division standings might range, and then you're looking at guy that was labeled as a generational talent, Trevor Lawrence, is like the third best quarterback in the division. You think there is a possibility that could be the case?
Well, I am a Florida fan, so I love Anthony Richardson, and I
Yep.
would I would love for that to happen. I mean, we didn't see too much of him, and he's not coming into a team or to a system that was kind of has a lot of rebuilding to do. Obviously, they do have a lot of work, but I mean, as much as we love the Texans, let's be honest, the Colts were a fourth down drop from being
Yep.
in the playoffs compared to and winning the division compared to the Texans. So it's not they don't need a lot of work, and I mean, obviously Gardner Minshew was a big part of that, who I think is a great quarterback, who I think could go win a job with the Raiders. But you look at everything they kind of had around him, man. You don't even have your starter, and you are like again a drop away from the playoffs. I think Richardson gets in there and he kind of comes into this year taking care of his body more and taking less hits, kind of like how we seen Lamar when he first came in compared to the last few years, and even Josh Allen now, who's a lot less risky with his body, where he takes that step back of I'm still going to use my legs and be effective. I'm just not going to take as much hits. Richardson does that, gets in the weight room, gets in the film room, kind of pick up on some things where he needs to improve at as a passer. Again, like I said, I've watched a lot of him at Florida, and he does need some work as a passer, but he got weapons. You got Michael Pittman around him. You got Josh Downs, who had a very quiet but good rookie year. You maybe go get another wide receiver in free agency. There's still some names available, or you go draft a receiver. I think the Colts can be better than Jacksonville, and I absolutely agree. Where I think we're looking at it this year at the end of the year, and we're like, all right, Trevor Lawrence, you just slipped down again. So I don't think that's too crazy of a take. I love it. I think I agree.
Yeah, the Trevor Lawrence stuff. Look, he's a solid quarterback, but I don't think he'll ever be what people expect him to be at the number one pick. At least he hasn't been through his first couple years here in the league. Now, when you look back at that draft class, you're thinking to yourself, man, Trevor Lawrence looks like a god tall then, because you have Trevor Lawrence, and after that, you have Mac Jones, you got Justin Fields, you got Zach Wilson. Not necessarily a great list. So Trevor Lawrence does come out of that draft as the Tom Brady, I guess, if you want to put it, or whatever, the greatest of those quarterbacks. But Not very hard to do when you look at that
It's
class.
kind of just looking at. I know we're going to get this conference is this division is next. We're going to get into it, but
Yeah.
it seems like with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert. Since we're about to get on the topic, we're at that point where we're not calling. I don't want to say calling players out, but we're not judging players for what they are. I mean, those two guys is like, you find a quarterback with some shoulder length hair and let's just lose our minds and they're going to be so great. And they haven't been that good. I mean, neither one of them. And again, we're about to talk about Herbert and I get into that. And we've already had our conversation about Herbert. But I mean, it's time that we stop looking at what the quarterbacks could possibly be. They'll look at their ceiling and what it what we could get from him and look at what's going on in the moment. And perfectly said, Trevor Lawrence he's just not been that. I mean, they did win that playoff game, but let's not forget he threw 4 interceptions in the first half of that game, and just I don't want to call it lucky, but obviously had the rabbit's foot in his back pocket for that second half
Yeah.
of the game. But he
Brandon, yeah.
hasn't been, it hasn't been what he was supposed to be coming into the league, not at all.
Yeah, I mean Brandon Staley exists, so
That's true.
that helps as well. But
That's
yeah,
true.
that's a perfect transition into the AFC West here, which is kind of wrapping up the AFC before we get into the NFC. And we'll start with the Chargers. I'll be honest here. The Chargers are, and
Worse
maybe
than they
I'm
were
crazy,
last
but
year.
what do you say? A lot worse.
Worse, a
Yeah,
lot
the
worse.
Chargers are, you were perfect with that. They are a lot worse than I expected them to be when we were recording this episode. I did not expect their roster to look this bad. And I thought for sure that they would kind of retool. That was obvious with a new coach. They needed to, salary cap stuff, they needed to retool, but I didn't expect this to look this bad. I mean, they traded Keenan Allen for basically nothing. You got Mike Williams is going to be out. He's visiting with the Panthers, I believe, Sunday, and I think he's visiting with the Jets on Monday or whatever. I know he's visiting with the Jets Monday. Panthers, I think he's visiting either today or tomorrow, one of these days on the weekend. So he's gone. Austin Eckler's gone. He's in Washington, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But now you look at their roster. I mean, who is Justin Herbert supposed to throw to? And I get it's a new coach. I understand that. But I'm just warning Chargers fans. I think the whole Jim Harbaugh thing is great. But I think I think Harbaugh even maybe, they've got a lot more work to do than I think a lot of Chargers fans realize. Like I'll admit, I said the same thing. I thought this team could be a playoff team. But after looking at this roster right now, this is potentially, in my eyes, the worst roster in this division. Potentially. Actually, that's probably crazy. The Broncos exist. But
Yeah.
them and the Broncos, in my eyes, are going to be the bottom feeders. I mean, if the Broncos had a quarterback, it's the only thing that separates them two is the Broncos have a quarterback. If the Broncos have a quarterback, they're similar rosters. They don't have much receivers. They don't really have a running back. They're similar. So that's the only thing that separates. And the Broncos might draft a quarterback. So what have been your impressions on the Chargers? This roster to me screams they were a 5-win team last year. They've gotten worse. Hey, what is it? Is it crazy to say they're a 4 or 5-win team again this year at best?
Yeah. I think I agree. I mean, I feel like they did not go into free agency where it's let's dethrone the Chiefs and possibly be the team to beat in the division, and it's just as long as you're not worse than the Broncos. Because I mean,
Yeah.
I know they had a lot of cap hit between Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Mac, and Joey Bosa, which a few of those guys selfishly said, "No, I'm not taking pay cuts." And I mean, I guess I get it, which is a big reason why Keenan Allen was dealt. But kind of just again looking at that roster, I mean, this roster is absolutely terrible from the ground up. You look at all the big names in the defense, and they were already one of the worst defenses of all of last year. So like that doesn't help. And then Austin Eckler was obviously not what he used to be. You get rid of your two
Yep.
receivers, even though one of them wasn't healthy last year, but now you're relying on your wide receiver one to be someone who they thought might be the biggest draft bust, the
Yeah.
Chargers have ever
Yep.
reached in their life. So I don't know. It's terrible. I don't know what they could possibly do in the draft to just be so much better than they were last year. But no, this roster is probably one of the worst in all of football. I 100% agree.
Yeah, and you also look at it too. They got rid of Khalil Mack, or he got obviously released. He was your top tackler last year, or not top tackler. I apologize. your top sack guy. I think he had 17. So they've got problems. They've got issues. They've got. I apologize. I believe Khalil Mack did remain with the Chargers. I believe they restructured his contract.
I think he
Yeah,
ended
he
up
did remain.
restructuring him
Yes.
and Bosa. They were
Yeah, they both. So I
going to
apologize for
release
that.
him, but they decided to
Mhm.
restructure after they said no.
Yep. Yeah. So I apologize for that. But he's obviously still a solid piece. But they've got. I mean, they did bring in Gus Edwards, which is coming off a career year at 13 touchdowns last year. But you're relying on Quentin Johnson. How many big drops did we see? That Quentin Johnson was sort of turning into a meme this year, for being honest with him. I mean, the amount of big drops this guy had, and he's a first round pick too, which makes it even worse. This is some fifth round pick receiver that was playing because of injuries. Your first round pick in 2023, the amount of crucial drops, and now you're asking this guy to take over for Keenan Allen. Really? It's crazy. They brought in Gus Edwards, they brought in Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly. Those are the big moves that they were making. Those are the championship moves. So if the Broncos had a quarterback, Chargers would be the worst team in the division. But the Broncos not having a quarterback, they are the second worst team, I believe, in the division. Even the Raiders, I know there's some questions there about quarterback, but they also brought in Gardner Minshew. They've got, they brought in Christian Wilkins. They've got some pieces. They are tearing this down. So, do you have any?
Yeah, I want to get into your point about Quentin Johnson again. You don't want to sit there and bash a guy and kind of talk down on a guy for kind of what's going on. But I would like to have JSN, Jalen Hyde, who we haven't seen much of, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, who I talked about here, Tank Dell, who has really put the league on notice, Rasheed Rice, who came out of nowhere, and a sleeper who I actually played against in high school, A.T. Perry, who plays for the Saints. We're kind of looking at some of the guys that Quentin Johnson was kind of drafted with, and you're like, we could have drafted anybody but you. I mean, just like respectfully, the Chargers, like, there's anybody who could have drafted but you. And we end up taking you, and you have not gelled to be what you're supposed to. And like you just said, I mean, Keenan Allen, I think, is going to be a future Hall of Famer, or at least considered for it. So you were supposed to be the guy to kind of not replace Keenan Allen, but to step up and be the number one option. And you have to take after what Keenan Allen has done for that organization. I kind of want to say I feel bad for Chargers fans, the four of them that actually exist, but I don't. I mean, it is what it is, but that roster is definitely the worst in football. I think I agree. And kind of just to go into the Raiders, I know that's where you were kind of leading up to next. Raiders. Honestly, I think they are a quarterback and a receiver away from actually being pretty decent. The defense wasn't too bad. You throw Christian Wilkins in the mix of that. I do still think they need another running back over with the Raiders, but you got Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers didn't have too bad of a year. But I think if you move him down to the slot, move him to the 3, you go to get a wide receiver 2 and give Gardner Minshew the starting job. I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, he's been good with the Colts. He was decent in his time in Philly. He was very good with Jacksonville. I mean, you give Gardner the starting spot, which I think is what they brought him over there to do anyways. You get another receiver to help out Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. I think the Raiders could be pretty decent. They bought into what Antonio Pierce is kind of, selling for them. I think they have the opportunity to be pretty good. Not dethrone the Chiefs good. Like, we're not there, but I can see the Raiders winning 10 games this year, 10-9 games, getting into the playoffs. Just considering the rest of the AFC, how it's shaping up. I like them. I really like them.
Yeah, I like what the Raiders have done too, and that locker room also has a strong belief in Antonio Pierce, which that bond they've kind of formed is really, really strong right now.
Yeah.
You mentioned Devontae Adams. And look, I mean, Gardner Minshew, this is a guy that was a drop away from making the playoffs in the AFC. So he knows what it takes to win in the AFC. This isn't like a guy that came over from the NFC, which is obviously weaker than the AFC. Like, he knows what it takes. So he's solid. He's a solid quarterback. He's definitely an upgrade over Aiden O'Connell. Definitely an upgrade over Jimmy G. But Christian Wilkins and Max Crosby, that is going to be a nasty,
Yeah.
nasty combo. That's going to be a really, really tough day for quarterbacks facing those guys. So definitely a team that a quarterback's not going to want to watch or want to see anytime. But yeah, I mean, look, this was a team that went into Kansas City last year and took down the Chiefs on Christmas, I believe it was, or
Yeah.
something around that point.
Yeah.
So, like, is it crazy to say that they can maybe beat the Chiefs again this year? The Chiefs are still going to win that division, but just looking at what the Raiders did last year, they were able to win some games. They were able to be competitive at times, even with some of these holes. They finished 8-9. They were in the playoff conversation barely, but they were in it late. You add Gardner Minshew to the mix. You add Christian Wilkins. You add a new Antonio Pierce for a full season. They won 8 games last year. It's not crazy to say they could be a 10-win team. So I think this is definitely a team that could make the playoffs. That defense is very, very scary. It's gonna be fun to watch what those two guys can do. And you go to the Kansas City Chiefs, where of course they brought back Chris Jones. That's the biggest. One of the biggest moves in the wall. It's a 4-year or a 5-year deal, $95 million. And then they brought in Marquise Brown to, I guess, be the number one, be the 1-2 punch alongside Rashee Rice. I'm not as high as on Marquise Brown as I guess others are. It is only a 1-year deal worth up to 11 million. So it almost is like a prove it deal for Hollywood Brown, because throughout his career, he had some moments in Baltimore, but throughout his career, it seems like he's left some meat on the bone. It seems like he hasn't quite lived up to the expectations that were put on him. So I feel like this is an opportunity. You go and play with the best quarterback in the league, a Super Bowl team. You're going to get a very large role. You're going to be asked to do a lot alongside Rashee Rice. I feel like this 1-year deal is smart business for Kansas City, because best case scenario, he plays great. He lives up to his potential, and then you sign him long-term after the season. Worst case scenario, he doesn't play well. I still think they should draft another receiver, and then you move on at the end of the year. But look, I don't love the move, but I understand where the Chiefs are coming from. There's better options out there, but in terms of the value, 1-year deal, I get what the Chiefs are trying to do here, and more help could still be on the way. What was your impressions of this move?
I am the complete opposite of you. I love it. I mean, we seen the Chiefs last year, who I think this is probably the least amount they've thrown the ball actually downfield since
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Mahomes became the quarterback. So Marquise Brown is kind of stepping into that Tyreek Hill kind of role. They had MVS to do that last year, but he struggled with some drops, so they weren't able to really, complete a lot of those deep passes down the field that we love seeing Kansas City do with Tyreek Hill. And for Marquise Brown, I think in Baltimore he didn't get the opportunity to kind of show that, because that's what he was at Oklahoma. And same with the Cardinals. I mean, Kyler Murray was hurt. And I do agree though, where we kind of seen some inconsistency with him, where you've seen some really good Marquise Brown and you've seen some where you're just like, all right, it's what is this guy doing? But with the Chiefs, I mean, I think we all know that there might not be a more dangerous quarterback in open field than Patrick Mahomes. So we're talking about broken plays, Marquise Brown running across the field, wide open, deep balls, because he's a very fast guy. And everyone, for some reason, I think when you get to Kansas City, you get some attributes, plus 10 catching,
Yeah.
plus 5 speed, those type of things. And I think that's that thing for Marquise Brown, where you get him, you get Rashee Rice. We're talking about speed, and it was all really just to take some pressure off of Travis Kelsey, which was the main thing they needed to do.
Yeah.
So for the Chiefs, you're already coming off the Super Bowl. I mean, draft time, you throw Xavier Worthy in that group of receivers. We're talking about some speed for Patrick Mahomes, and they might as well just stamp their ticket in New Orleans for another Super Bowl, because I like it. I think I really like what the Chiefs are doing.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. It's kind of still, I guess, a wait and see for me. But you do make a good point. I mean, everybody that goes to Kansas City, it's plus 10 strength, plus 10 speed, plus 5 catching. It's all that good stuff. When automatic Super Bowl ring, automatic jewelry. So it's pretty
Guaranteed.
much, yeah. It's
And now
Lombardi.
your TV time is up 15% with
Yep.
Taylor Swift.
Yep.
It's a win-win. I mean, it gets a little cold in November, December, but Again, Super Bowl is almost guaranteed. You got a great coach. TV time is going up. Yeah, what can possibly go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And then one other thing too, I just want to go back to the Chargers, and then we'll go to the NFC here. Um, I feel like the Quentin Johnson situation is screams the Jalen Rieger Eagles, where they
I
passed
agree.
up on
That's
Justin Jefferson
yeah,
and they brought in Jalen Rieger, and I was like, what are
yeah.
they doing? That's what it screams here. Like even just Tank Dell, he's a second round pick. They could have took Tank Dell, and then they got like all these guys that Quentin Johnson got drafted with, especially the ones behind him. We're gonna look back on this, maybe even next year if Tank Dell goes out there and dominates. We're gonna look back on this and say, man, this is Jalen Rieger, Justin Jefferson all over again. Maybe even worse because it's more than just one receiver that they passed up on. So it's a tough spot for LA. So now you move on to the NFC East. I'll let you have the floor here. The Cowboys have not done a whole lot. They did sign a long snapper, which is or re-sign their long snapper, which is a big move for them, I guess. So, what have been your impressions on Dallas?
Man. There's just so many words that just come to my mind at one time. I am so glad that they re-signed the long snapper because we're going to be punting the ball a lot, a lot next year. I mean, realistically, I know I'm going to keep it serious here for a little bit. All jokes aside, you know, I love Dak Prescott. Every time I get time to talk highly of Dak Prescott, I do. We only have him signed through this year. There is a world where I hope we do not extend Dak Prescott and we let him walk next year.
Mhm.
And this is not because of Dak Prescott. Like I said, I absolutely love the guy. Thank you for everything you've done for the organization. It's just as the fans and the organization, we don't deserve him. I mean, you all right.
The long snapper is a big move.
I mean,
I can't get over the long snapper.
we have made three moves. The first was being a long snapper. Jordan Lewis, which is a great, that was great. And then Eric Kendricks. I love the Eric Kendricks move. Now, Leighton Van Der Esch is now gone. He was a starter.
Mhm.
Michael Gallup is now gone, who was another starter. Dorrance Armstrong is gone, who was a starter. Tony Pollard is gone, a starter. Tyron Smith, who was another starter. I mean, I can honestly keep going, but I think you get what I'm saying. Where they have literally done nothing, like nothing at all. So I already see how this is going to play out. First of all, if we are in any way competitive, it's going to be because of Dak Prescott. And this might actually be the year where fans can appreciate Dak and finally see, like, all right, if we didn't have him, we're probably a 6-5-7 win team because of how good Dak Prescott is. But the organization, Steven and Jerry Jones, they might be two of the dumbest people I have ever had to watch run a team in my life. I mean, for him to say acquiring players is a 365-day thing. You had 14 running backs, starting running backs. And that might not be the right number. You had 14 starting running backs that you could have possibly went. You didn't even pick up the phone to call Derrick Henry, which
Yeah.
for the last 2 years, there's so much heat of Derrick Henry being a Dallas. I mean, the man has a home in Dallas that he uses for the offseason. You don't even call him. You don't even pick up the phone. Joe Mixon, I mean, we just needed a running back. Joe Mixon
Mhm.
was traded to the Texans for a bag of Starburst, the unwrapped Starburst. You don't even a seventh round pick. I mean, you could have given up a 7th round pick. They didn't try that. Aaron Jones was released, and I mean, if you can't beat him, have him join you. You don't go get Aaron Jones, who is probably more owner of the Dallas Cowboys than Jerry Jones is, considering what he does every time we play him. Aaron Jones gets released, and you get an opportunity to jump on, and you let him stay in the division and go to Minnesota, which I guess the thing is, do not bank on the Cowboys next year to win a division. If they are competitive, it's going to be because of Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. But I hope this is Dak's last year with Dallas. And I'm sorry, Dak, I love you, but it's time for you to go. And again, not because of you, but just because of what the Joneses continue to do to you in your career, where Now we finally see it's all about to come crashing down, and we're going to blame Dak Prescott for it. So I hope he walks, and we're stuck with Zach Wilson for the next 3 to 4 years, so we can finally appreciate great quarterback play and see what it is to kind of build around your team to find success, which obviously we don't care to do. So for me to, I guess, wrap up what I feel about Dallas and to keep it PG,
Mhm.
um, it's gonna be hard to be a Dallas fan after this year.
Yeah,
Definitely.
the long Trent Sieg, the long
Yeah.
snapper.
Yeah.
I
Kind of
it was
put
so
his jersey in the pro
it
shop.
it was I see Cowboys made a move up. They re-signed the long snapper. Man, I feel your pain. Zach Wilson to Dallas would be a perfect match for both sides.
And I'm going to put a petition to let him wear number 8 when he gets
Zach,
there.
yeah, I
Give
mean,
him Troy. Give him Troy
yeah,
Aikman's number.
I mean, he's
Let him wear
better than
number
Troy
8.
Aikman. But anyway, yeah, when you look at it's interesting that you bring up not finishing at first because the NFC East outside of Dallas, they've all made moves, and that's where it kind of gets interesting. You look at the Eagles, of course, they signed Saquon Barkley. They also got Devin White. They also brought in C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Bryce Huff. I've loved what the Eagles have done so far. They've had a serious need on defense. They went out and got it. DeAndre Swift was gone. They brought in Saquon Barkley, which we discussed a lot on this show. What have been your impressions on what the Eagles have done? Because you mentioned finishing at first. The Eagles, I think, potentially have had the best offseason so far in this division. They've filled up a lot of needs, especially defensively. Bryce Huff, for somebody that has watched him play over the last 4 seasons, the guy has only gotten better. He's one of the most underrated pass rushers in the game. 10 sacks last year. His motor's insane. He's going to be a beast. Gardner Johnson, also very good. So what have been your impressions on Philly? I know it probably stings, but on what they've done.
I'm convinced they are money laundering or they're doing something
Yeah.
they got no business doing with, the amount of free agents they're able to sign. But I mean, respectfully, I agree. I love what they did. You address the needs that are on hand. So you need a running back, you go get the best running back you could possibly get. I think the Devontae Parker pickup is very underrated, just consider that's another tall, big body, not really big body, but I say big body as in tall. So another receiver with some height that can catch the jump balls, which would be great for Jalen Hurts. And I mean, you throw Devontae Smith in the slot, you put Parker outside. I think that's great for him. And again, you go attack the defense. Devin White obviously didn't have the best of years, but it's again, I know we kind of joked about it earlier with the Chiefs making moves and everyone gets better with the Chiefs, but for a lot of guys, a lot of players, you get that fresh scenery. You're somewhere new and you elevate your game. Like you look a lot better than you did the previous year, which I think could be the case for Devin White. C.J. Gardner Johnson's back. He obviously was effective with the Lions. So for the Eagles, I mean, I know they had a down year last year, like they completely just crumbled and fell apart. But the Eagles understand, and I guess maybe Howie Roseman might need to talk to Jerry Jones and kind of see where when you are one of the best teams in not only the division, not only the conference, but the NFL for the case for the Eagles. They're looking at it and they're just like, the only roadblock for us is the 49ers. So what can we possibly do to get over that roadblock? And they did that. They brought in the guys that they needed to bring in. And I mean, we're looking at maybe 13, 14 wins. I won't be surprised. I think Jalen Hurts has a better year than he had last year, of course. And the offense is going to look completely different. Kellen Moore is now the play caller. So for the Eagles, man, I think you're gonna have a great year. I think they're gonna have a really great year.
Yeah, I agree. They've done a lot of really good things. I think there's an argument to be made that they have had one of the better off seasons so far.
Yeah,
They've plugged a lot of
absolutely.
holes. And they, look, they were struggled last year, but it wasn't like they were awful. I mean, this was still a team that got to the playoffs, still had a chance. Like, even though they struggled, they still won 11 games. For your off year to be winning 11 games, you plug these holes, like you said, 13 wins is certainly in the conversation for Philly. As for the other teams, I really like what the Giants have actually done. Obviously, the quarterback's still up in the air, but they brought in Brian Burns. They've fixed 2 of the needs on the offensive line. I really like what they've done. They also brought in Devin Singletary on a low cost, cheap deal. I think they've done well. Washington's an interesting team because Frankie Louvu, who's a former Jet, he's turned into a heck of a player. Frankie Louvu's been, has turned into really just one of the more underrated linebackers in the game. They also brought in Bobby Wagner. They also brought in Austin Eckler. They brought in Zach Ertz. The only problem is with all these moves is if like they brought these guys in a couple years ago when they were in their prime,
Yeah.
they would be great. But a lot of these guys that they're bringing in, Eckler still got I think some gas left. Ertz though and Bobby Wagner I think still solid, but these guys aren't quite what they were. So what has been your reaction in Washington? I like their moves, but there's some risk there. Some of these guys might not quite be what they once were.
So I'm going to go brief Giants, and we'll just go
Yeah.
back to them real quickly and then go to Washington. As far as the Giants, I do like Singletary, and Brian Burns was huge, but obviously, I think they still got a lot of work to do. I mean, the team was pretty bad last year. Singletary is no Saquon Barkley, with all due respect. Question
Yeah.
marks at the receiver spots, question marks to the offensive line. But you still got the draft to come around, and I think the main thing for them will be quarterback this year. I think they're losing some faith in Daniel Jones. So the moves were, I guess, decent for what they needed to be, but I don't think they're ready to compete for the division. As far as Washington, 100% agree. I mean, you got a bunch of elders that you signed, but I think the
Hmm.
thing for Washington and Dan Quinn is you know what you needed and you went out and you got it. So back to what I just said again. I mean, you players that's getting older, it might just take a year or two for a new team, and you elevate. The only thing with Washington is the quarterback once again, but I got this feeling where Drake May will be a Washington Commander next year. So if Drake May can kind of come in and be pretty decent, you get what you expect from him. I can see Washington finishing second in the division. I don't say good enough for the playoffs, but I mean, looking at the rest of it, Giants are still the Giants. That team in Arlington, the Eagles are obviously going to be pretty good. I can see Washington being second in the division next year and, surprising quite some people, especially with everything they got.
Yeah, Drake May, if he goes there, I really like Drake May. Like I've mentioned, I think
Mhm.
he's the top quarterback. But yeah, Washington's they're rebuilding, they're getting better. They're in a lot better spot than they were. Still got Terry McLaurin, still got Jahan Dotson. They're in a lot better spot than they were just last year, a couple years ago. Kind of entering this rebuild phase where they finally got the GM, finally got the ownership. They've gone through a lot of problems. It seems like they're finally turning a corner there. Now, when you go to the NFC North, um, this division is going to be fun next year. You go to Chicago, Keenan Allen. They obviously go out and bring him in. They also brought in DeAndre Swift on a 3-year, $24.5 million deal. A much needed boost to that running room. They also brought back Jalen Johnson, one of their better players in the secondary. The Keenan Allen move was the biggest one. You now look at that team. They've got Keenan Allen. They've got DJ Moore. When you go over to the Packers, they, of course, signed Josh Jacobs. They also got Xavier McKinney. So they added a little bit there to what they've got going on. The Vikings are a train wreck. You don't have Kirk Cousins. They don't have a quarterback. Sam Darnold, I'm rooting for him, but I don't think he's going to do a whole lot. One team, though, in this division, Detroit Lions. I think the Detroit Lions have done a lot of good things so far. I know they're not the biggest moves, splashiest moves, but I feel like the Detroit Lions underrated have been one of the winners this free agency so far. They brought in DJ Reader to bulk up that defensive line. They ran out and re-signed Graham Glasnow, who was one of their better offensive linemen at guard. And then they also traded for Carlton Davis, and they also brought in Amik Robertson. So I like what they've done in the secondary, especially Carlton Davis. This is a team that their weakness was their secondary, weakness was their defense. And they've brought in two guys to help fix that. And they've also stirred up their defensive line. So not the biggest, flashiest moves like what you've seen Chicago do. And of course, the the Packers rather going out there and surprising everybody, getting rid of Aaron Jones and then bringing in Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney. What have been your impressions of this division and some of the moves that have been made?
This this division is insane. I
Yeah.
mean, I agree with Minnesota. I agree, but I disagree with you to a point with Minnesota. I mean, they have completely upgraded at running back. I think Aaron Jones might be better than what Dalvin Cook was when he was there. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy. I think it's a possibility. Obviously, if Kirk Cousins would have remained, who's to say that some of these moves would have went the same? But just looking at their roster, we're gonna go offensively. You still got Jefferson for the meantime, unless they end up dealing him. Still got Jordan Addison. You still got arguably the best tight end in football. Some say Kelsey, some say Hawkinson. I mean, now you throw Aaron Jones in the mix of that. You just need a quarterback, and I don't think they need a quarterback that is absolutely amazing, just complete game changer. But we kind of seen what Brock Purdy did with the Niners, and I think the Vikings have that similar level of talent, at least on the outsides, for a quarterback, a rookie quarterback to step in. If he can manage the game, they can be pretty good. But it is safe to say they are probably the worst team in the division as of right now, considering the moves that everybody else made. I think the Bears, though, they're going to be scary. They
Yeah.
are going to be insane, and I am hoping that they stick with Justin Fields because the thing last year was Justin Fields has nobody around him, and a lot of people were saying, me myself, why go get Caleb Williams when you have nobody around Justin Fields? So now I'm kind of just like, you got the pieces, stick with Justin Fields. I mean, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and I'm seeing Gerald Everett here, who was actually pretty solid with the Chargers last year. And you still got Cole Kmet. I believe they still have Cole Kmet as well.
Yep.
That is a scary team for the Bears. I don't think I can remember a time like this roster really looked this good. And if they get what they get from the guys, how they looked last year, obviously Keenan Allen, who we spoke about, and DeAndre Swift, who had a great year. Gerald Everett had a pretty great year. I mean, is it crazy to sit here and say that maybe we're talking about the Bears winning the division next year if Justin Fields is their quarterback?
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's crazy. I mean, that 1-2 punch of DJ Moore and Keenan Allen is going to be scary. I mean, that's going to be scary. There is a lot of teams that would sign up for just one of them. Have two of them on your team is scary. And then, like you mentioned, Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet as well. You've got a solid 1-2 punch there at tight end, and you finally got that running back that you desperately needed. Which of course in DeAndre Swift, where last year you're running out Khalil Herbert, it was a mess.
Yeah.
I look, you guys know, how I stand. I don't love Caleb Williams. I don't think he's gonna be very good either. I think there's some concerns there. We both stand on the same thing of Justin Fields. Justin Fields is there and he's got this talent around him. I can't see this team not winning 10, 11 games, right? Caleb Williams, though, I don't know. I have some concerns. Now, here's the thing. Whoever they draft, whoever their quarterback is, there's no excuses. You've got everybody. You've got all of the weapons at your disposal. You got Keenan Allen, you got DJ Moore, you've got a good running back. You're the quarterback. You got all the weapons. It's up to you to go out there and do it. So, they could certainly be in the conversation to win a division. This division's gonna be so much fun. You got the Packers with Jordan Love. You've got the Lions who probably won't go anywhere, and now you add Chicago to the mix. Minnesota, they're probably the worst. But if Minnesota still had Kirk Cousins, this division would be even crazier because you can make a legitimate case for all four teams then to win this thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. And look, all these teams too, like the Packers are young, but you're talking about a team. Let's say they go out there and hypothetically get Caleb Williams. You're talking about a division with some young quarterbacks. You got Jordan Love, young. Goff's not very young, but Caleb Williams would obviously be young. Minnesota will probably go younger route eventually at quarterback, so they maybe draft one. So it's exciting, but yeah, I could see this team being a threat to win this division.
Well, and also, I
It's
kind of
gonna
want
be
to
fun.
go back on like you're saying with the quarterbacks. I mean, I think last year probably showed to me more than anything where a quarterback can step in and find success, and it's not too hard. I mean, I feel just a few years ago, you kind of look at a backup quarterback as a fan, just say at least a backup quarterback steps in for your starter, and you're just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
season's over. But we seen it last year with Minshew, who we spoke about, and we saw it with Joe Flacco with the Browns, and just a lot of teams around the league where like the backup quarterbacks step in and they actually have pretty good years. So I mean, who is to say that Sam Darnold can't do that, because now the pressure is off of him. When he first came in the league, he was supposed to be the guy. Like now, Sam Darnold has been around the league, set behind some guys. So who's to say him being able to come into Minnesota with the weapons around him and just play freely can't find some success? Like I don't think we should completely close the door on Minnesota. I do think they need another quarterback, but I just don't think they are going to be as bad as some think. I think they're still capable of 8 to 9 wins, like possibly with Sam Darnold.
Yeah, and if you got Aaron Jones, and then you have Justin Jefferson, who's if he's still there. I mean, Justin Jefferson's a monster. You're talking about probably the best player at his position. Whoever's at quarterback, they're going to have guys around them to do some damage. So, yeah, the NFC North for a while there, it's funny. They were the laughing stock for a little while there. The Lions weren't any good. The Bears have recently been down in the dumpster. You had Green Bay with Rodgers, and that was it. Minnesota had some years was kind of up and down, up and down. And now you look at the division, and they're one of the better divisions in the league. So it's going to be exciting. Now, you talk about the Vikings, and now you move on here to the NFC South, which is where Kirk Cousins now lands. And of course, the NFC South, I feel like there hasn't been a whole lot going on. I feel like the NFC South in general, kind of a boring division. It's always
Yeah.
boring. And rightfully so. The Tampa Bay doesn't have to do a whole lot. They brought back Baker Mayfield. They brought in Mike Evans. They did what they needed to do. They haven't had to make any major move. They, of course, brought in 2 former Jets, Jordan Whitehead and in Bryce Hall. So 2 former Jets in there. But the biggest move was, of course, Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. What is your reaction to this one as he will now land in Atlanta and have Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson around him? How do you think this will fit?
I don't care what people say. I love Kirk Hill. I mean, I think Kirk Cousins is a great guy. I think he's a very good quarterback. I mean, so looking at the Falcons, I think they are going to be very, very scary next year. He obviously doesn't have the same weapons, the same level of talent that he had in Minnesota, but he's close. I mean, we're talking about a very misused Bijan Robinson, Drake London, who showed he can be very good when he actually gets the ball. Kyle Pitts, again, Florida guy, love Kyle Pitts. We know what he can do. Then you just throw Darnell Mooney and Rondell Moore in the mix of that. 2 guys full of speed. I seen a stat the other day where Darnell Mooney actually, this might not be the right wording, but was possibly, I think he was overthrown more than any receiver in the league on 3 deep balls last year. So now, which is a bad look for Justin Fields and everything going on. But now we get Kirk Cousins, who is a lot more accurate than Justin Fields and just a lot more experience. And kind of how the North are, I mean, the South already played last year. I don't see why the Falcons don't win the division this year. And I can see them. I guess we're kind of predicting win range. I can see maybe around 11 to 12 next year. You don't really have to worry about the Saints, don't really got to worry about the Panthers. I think they can split with Tampa Bay and don't have the schedule right here in front of me. I do know they get Dallas next year. That doesn't even matter. That's, you can chalk that as a win. But just looking at the Falcons next year, I think they can be really good, like scary good, where they might make some teams sweat inside the NFC. I love what the Falcons did in free agency.
Yeah, and you look at the previous records, and we've done this a little bit here, where you look at teams' previous records prior to quarterback. Yeah, this was a team last year that was rolling Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke out there. Now you're seeing this, and you're thinking to yourself, you won 7 games with that quarterback room. You add Kirk Cousins to the mix. Look, Kirk Cousins isn't elite. He's not dominant. He's not the greatest. He's not a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, but he's still solid. He can still get to you to the playoffs and maybe win a playoff game or two. 7-10 team, add Kirk Cousins in the mix. It's not crazy this team can go and win 10 games, 10, 11 games. So, yeah, it's going to be, and two, I mean, you look at the division. The division isn't overly strong. It's not a dominant division by any means. I mean, it's, Tampa Bay is obviously, I think, the favorite to win it probably still, but Carolina, you still have some questions there. And then, of course, the Saints, I don't know. I don't know really how to feel about the Saints. I mean, they're kind of Derek Harden and show you a whole lot. They're boring. The Saints are a boring
Yeah,
football team, you know.
absolutely.
So, and then you look at Carolina, of course, they brought in Robert Hunt, who went out and got a ton of money, which is good for him. I think it's a little bit of an overpay, but I understand what Carolina's trying to do, bringing in both guards, Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt, to try and protect Bryce Young. Now they did lose Brian Burns, but yeah, I mean, the Falcons are going to be, it's going to be interesting. They're going to be one of those kind of fun, frisky teams that, might not be always the favorite, might not be the most talked about team ever because Kirk Cousins not very flashy, although unless if he's got all the chains on. But they're gonna make some noise. So any other thoughts on this division?
Well, yeah, quickly on the Falcons again.
Yeah.
Looking at the schedule, you get the NFC East. So we're talking about Washington, Dallas, the Giants, Philly. I think they can go 3-1, maybe even 4-0. Obviously Carolina, obviously New Orleans, obviously Tampa, Kansas City, the Chargers, Denver, the Raiders, Seattle, Pittsburgh, Minnesota. Tell me why they cannot win 12 games next year. I think
Mhm.
it's highly possible. I mean, if they sweep the division or they don't, I see maybe one division loss being Tampa Bay. They'll beat Minnesota. They'll beat Pittsburgh. They'll beat Seattle. Might lose to Philly. You might lose to Kansas City. And Dallas is still iffy, kind of give or take, kind of the situation over there. But I don't see it 15-2, 14-3. There's going to be some games where they slip up. We're not talking
Yeah.
about the Patriots here, like when they went 17-0. They're going to slip up a few games and come out flat. But I don't think 12 wins is outrageous for this team, especially if everybody's jailed by week one. If they're still figuring each other out throughout the season, probably not. But I mean, if Kirk Cousins get in there and kind of starts working with the guys in the offseason, which I think he will do, again, I see them winning 12 games next year.
Yeah, and it's also not a very fierce division. I mean, you probably
Yeah.
sweep Carolina, you probably sweep New Orleans, so that's 4 wins there. Tampa, you probably split, that's 5. Find another way to get at least 5 wins, 6 wins, and you're at 5, 6, 6 to 11 or 10 to 11. And yeah, I mean, you're looking at probably 5 wins within the division anyway. So yeah, I mean, the division doesn't scare you from a New Orleans, Carolina standpoint. Um, so now you move on here to the NFC West, which is interesting. You look at what obviously the Cardinals did. They went out and got Jonah Williams, got some help there for Kyler Murray. You're still looking around Arizona, though. You still kind of feel like, where do you what have been your impressions on this division and in Arizona, where you look at that team and Kyler Murray's their quarterback, their guy, but you still have some questions about where they're going to go with receiver.
Yeah, this division I think is very similar to the South, where there's only two teams probably worth talking about, and that's the 49ers
Yeah.
and the Rams. As
Yeah.
far as the Cardinals, I think they're banking on Marvin Harrison being there for the taking, but I mean, Chicago might kind of slide back in the draft to take them, and you pair them with the two that you got over there.
Yeah.
So if I'm the Cardinals and I'm looking, I mean, Rondell Moore did have a good year last year when he was on the field. So you go get rid of him for Desmond Ritter. They're going to be very bad next year. I want them to honestly free Kyler Murray. I mean, I just don't think he deserves that. I mean, send him to Minnesota or something, somewhere where he can win and be competitive and be good, because they are just as bad roster wise as the Chargers. I honestly think so. They're on that same level. I
Yeah.
don't get it. I really don't get what the Cardinals' approach was this free agency. It kind of just seemed like they were just signing guys for the fun of it. They didn't get better at all.
Yeah. Yeah. That biggest need of receiver is still there. It's still there, and that's certainly a concern for them. Banking on Marvin Harrison being there, I'd still think you got to add another veteran, though. I mean, even like somebody like a Tyler
Absolutely,
Boyd, it's just somebody.
absolutely.
You can't bank on a rookie to go out there and just dominate. Uh, you look at San Francisco, and they brought in Leonard Floyd, who played with the Bills, of course, there for a little bit. So they added some pieces. Not crazy stuff in this division. It's kind of like you mentioned, the Niners don't have to do a ton, I guess. I mean, you do have some
Yeah,
questions about Ayuk. If he's going to get traded, I doubt that happens. But you had a Super Bowl team in here. You have the Rams that are trying to kind of stay put. They went out and, of course, signed a guard, Jonah Jackson, I believe they signed. So, not too much here. This division is still the Rams and the Niners to lose. Seattle's going through a little bit of a retool with a new coach. No Pete Carroll. So we'll see what they look like this year. But any other closing thoughts on just free agency as a whole and any other moves that have gone down here before we close things out?
It was pretty exciting. I guess
Yeah.
that's pretty much it. Still quite a few names out there. You just mentioned Tyler Boyd, and there's a few other guys. So I guess we'll kind of just see how it continues to shape up, until the season starts and draft will be here before we know it.
Yeah, the draft is definitely going to be exciting. Looking forward to that. And, too, with the just free agency, of course, there's still a lot of names out there. Still a lot of guys. You mentioned Tyler Boyd. Mike Williams is still out there. So still
Michael Gallup,
dominoes. Yeah, Michael Gallup, still
everyone
dominoes
wants
that
him.
have to fall. Nobody wants him. Yeah. 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 Oh, man. But, yeah. So, and then, of course, too, one thing that we didn't talk a ton about, but Kenny Pickett to the Eagles. So that's interesting. So there's been a lot of action. There's been a lot of excitement. That'll continue. And we'll see you all back here same time next week discussing all of the latest around the NFL. As always, please like and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.